and they started talking about like Maslow's hierarchy. Like, this stuff is way over their heads. That, by the way, is how you can get into a situation where you spend 8 years studying a language and you still can't speak it. So today's video is entitled, Are Chinese People Really Bad at English? Kind of up my alley. We're looking at a language video directly. Don't expect to get a bunch of like English jokes out of me. I do take this kind of seriously. And frankly, if you're watching this and you are monolingual, you have no right to make fun of anyone else's English. One man's opinion. We're sticking with Asian Boss. I know I do them too much, but the problem is I'm trying to find new sources for street interviews. I can find lots of them for Korea. I can find lots of them for Japan, but Chinese street interviews are actually a little bit rare. So if any of you out there know of any good sources for these kind of videos for mainland China, please let me know. It'll make this a lot more interesting going forward. Anyway, I don't want to mess around too much. I want to get right into the video. One reminder, though, very quickly, if you have been enjoying this, and some of you have, please give me a subscription. I don't have very many of them right now, and you would be doing me a tremendous favor. Alright, so into the video, starting now.
Hi guys, it's Tina from Asian Boss. While English language courses in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan are slowly stagnating, China's ESL-related jobs have skyrocketed in the past few years and continue to grow exponentially. In some cases, Chinese parents are hiring native-speaking English teachers to teach their children starting from preschool. Though the younger generation is learning English earlier on, what about the current generation of adults? How good is their English? We wanted to test regular Chinese people on their English ability and if they thought learning English was still important. Let's hit the streets of Shanghai to find out.
All right, really quick on that last point. Indeed, I have worked with children as young as 4 years old. The very first place I worked, that was most of our classes. We technically did children through adults, but most of them were children, and the largest group of children probably were under 8 years old. So they really do start this young. Also, the centers for adults have really gone to decline. They basically don't exist anymore because the adults tend to go for lower priced online solutions and the centers tend to be more for their kids. So there really has been a decline. I'm not even sure if outside of like universities, if you really have classes with adults or business English in China anymore. It's pretty rare in Korea too. Continuing.
你英语会说吗？
会说，还不是很好。
一点点。
会说一点点，不是很好。
如果从1到10打分的话，你会给英文打几分
1到10啊，3分。
3分吧。
6分吧。
合格分吧。6分吗？对的。
Okay.
西方的话，
that's
有一个对中国人有一个偏见，
humble.
就是中国人英语说的不好，不会说英语。你觉得你同意这种偏见吗？
中国人说英语好的也很多，而且这个问题是相互的。那外国人说中文比较差的也很多，这个问题我觉得没意义。
我不同意。原因是？
原因是其实现在文化程度高了，所以说现在英语啊什么的还是比较普及的，所以说你也不能说他英语差，你只能说他不会说，就是。
So I think that's actually probably accurate. I mean, I'm obviously intimately familiar with the English competency of Chinese learners, but really, for a lot of them, that is true. People in that country have very little opportunity to practice because there's almost no foreigners there, but also a lot of them don't speak much. I know a lot of people who are absolutely capable of speaking English, but they are scared to death of being judged. It is a very Chinese thing. And so they don't talk much in that language, but they know it. They can communicate. They're just afraid to try. Honestly, that kind of confidence is one of the things I end up teaching about as much as anything more technical or mechanical. Continuing.
不敢说。
不对，我觉得就是有可能上年龄的那个层次的，比如说50多岁、60多岁的，有可能就是他们绝对不会说。然后现在的80后、90后，英文很好。
I beg to differ.
还有点同意。
是吗？可以具体讲一下吧？为什么？
就是基本上，因为现在中国不都是英语的话是应试教育的话，基本上都是那些就嘴巴上面念的比较少，大部分。
Okay, this gives me a chance to talk. I promise I'll keep this brief about what Chinese education looks like. If you ask Chinese people how they're taught, they'll say it's very theoretical. Like, that's how they've always explained to me how history is taught, but it's also how language is taught. And there is a sense that it seems difficult that you could teach a language just by having someone stand up at the front of a classroom and just teach from a set of slides, but that is absolutely how they do it. It's not very participatory because that's just not in the nature of the Chinese educational tradition. So when we do work in like centers, or even when I do my college classes, I have them speak as much or more. You're really supposed to have them speak more than you do. And that's very important because it's not practice they get anywhere else, because most of their classes are just sit, listen, and accept what you're told. Continuing.
都是写还有读的这一方面的，所以可能到实际上接触的话，可能就会少一点。
因为他对我们中国或者说我们东方的这一类人的话，他了解不够深，所以他存在这种偏见的话，也是能够理解。
So from now on, do you mind if we switch to English during the interview? 就是说，
那肯定不行。
想要看一下你的反应。
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I will try.
So in China, when do you normally start learning English?
我应该是从初中开始的。
我是在小学6年，小学6年。
We started learning English in primary school, but just very basic.
Since I'm in middle school.
大部分人如果说你是从80后、90后的年轻人，都会是从小学开始。那么从10后开始呢，可能慢慢就是会接触到的英语，就是从小学从幼儿园他就会接触到。
How many years?
For the record, I have worked in a fair number of like actual government public schools in China. I think the youngest class I ever worked with, the students were 11 years old. And by that point, obviously, if they're working with me, they've been taking the classes for at least a few years. So that is pretty standard these days. It's a completely ordinary part of the curriculum. There's no way in hell you're going to get up to the college level without taking at least some English, totally standard. Continuing.
That's for you.
9? How many years? High school for 6 years.
6年吧。
I just learned in middle school and 2 years in.
2 years is standard for college, yeah.
Because I leave college after 2 years.
I see.
So I didn't finish that. So 8 years.
小学6年到大学10年。
So you spoke English really well. How come your English is so good? Did you study overseas?
Yeah, I studied it in the U.S. When I first went to U.S., actually the stuff what we learned in school was not very practical. But you know, you have to finish college. You have to like take the tests and write the paper. So you have to learn.
You use it.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'll level. If you ever do encounter a Chinese person who has English skills that high level, and that would be, I've been kind of neck deep in IELTS recently. She would probably be, probably a band 8, really high level of proficiency. It's going to be one of two things, maybe one of three things. Either they studied overseas, or foreigner significant other, or they have a job where they have a lot of foreign coworkers. Probably more than one, but you're definitely looking for at least one of those if you're encountering a person who has a very high level of proficiency, because it means they practiced a lot, and as I will emphasize throughout this, Chinese people have very few opportunities to practice. Continuing.
I'm studying in the school. My mother find spoken language teachers for me, and I usually have the lessons with him. I go to the USA or UK.
Travel?
Yeah, just for travel. Yeah, I go there for. I usually speak to them. I'm not afraid.
Oh, not good. The vocabulary is a big problem.
It's what everyone complains about.
You know, after leaving school, there always some chance to read or listen to English, because I play guitar and some peers, some equipment, the manual is all written in English.
So everybody complains about vocabulary. People always say, I want to have a larger vocabulary. which is fair, but for most of my students, the number one problem is probably pronunciation. You get a lot of that. The people you're hearing in this video actually have very good pronunciation, much better than most of my students. There are a lot of little hang-ups you kind of begin to learn, little ticks. When you're working with foreign language students, understanding the source language is very useful because it'll let you understand why it is that they make certain mistakes. So, for example, the big pronunciation mistake, there's a bunch of them, but the biggest one, the most obvious one with Chinese students is mixing up TH and S, because as far as I can tell, none, but certainly Mandarin, but I don't think any of the Chinese spoken languages have any sound where the tongue passes between the teeth. So when they hit that sound, they kind of can't do it. So when you're working with students, you get a lot of thank you. A lot of them can't pronounce clothes. It comes out closes. Things like that. Continuing.
我们刚才那个突然用英文跟你对话，你是什么感觉？
我会着字的去听，然后如果说就是说你如果发音不是很清楚的话，我就会容易去听不懂它。
因为我其实工作的时候还是一半会用到英文，所以我觉得还好。
其实我词汇量不太够了，就是不太爱读书，所以说有些时候会慌一下，就不是那种紧张，但是会慌一下，就是我要是听不懂会怎么办？这样。
还好吧，其实那个我有点担心你要说一些词我听不太懂怎么办，但觉得还基本的还可以。对。
那么如果一个外国人过来向你问路的话，你会怎么做？
我只能告诉他，我跟你说中文你听得懂，你听得懂的话，我可以指给你。
我会告诉他你会说中文。
回答他大概的方向还是知道怎么讲的。
没什么障碍啊，他问路也经常做这种事情。
先看他会不会中文嘛。对的，然后因为毕竟是在中国嘛，像我们去国外，我们会用英语问路，不会用中文问路，所以说他来中国玩的话，首先他看他会不会中文，如果会中文的话，我们肯定用中文去跟他交流。如果他实在是不方便的话，尝试用英语去跟他沟通一下。
I would say it is a lot more important to know Chinese in China than it is to know Korean in Korea. That's just my take from the limited amount of time I've spent in Korea. Obviously not nearly as much. An interesting point about a lot of these people kind of seeming like they have some degree of trepidation about speaking English. That's pretty common. I had a student, one whom I cared very much about, who was at kind of a moderate level of spoken English, and she was trying to get into a company that was foreign run because she hated working for Chinese companies. She didn't like the way they operated. And she had an opportunity after a while to get into a Korean run company. But doing that meant that she'd be working with an international staff, so she'd have to speak primarily in English. And I was encouraging her to do this because this is something she said she wanted to do for a long time. She felt like she was under stress and underpaid at her current job. Obviously was not happy, but she just would not do it. She was scared to death. She didn't think she'd be able to manage it. She didn't think she had the vocabulary. Again, that's what I hear all the time. So that's pretty standard. And if you sit there for a second and think about it, you can probably understand why that is. If you were in the same situation, how comfortable would you be? Think about that. Continuing.
那么在中国社会里面，如果一个人英语讲得很流利的话，别人会怎么看待他？
我觉得目前来说，英文流利或者任何一个一门外语流利，都是还是蛮加分的，在生活或者是工作或者交朋友的时候，都是一个加分项吧。
我就觉得他是一个就是学习很努力的，然后工作状态肯定也是超好的。
如果是现在的话，其实也不会怎么看待他了，这是很正常的一个表现，就因为这个是一个必备的技能嘛。说的非常流利的话，也只有会在那种口译的现场才会有一些，或者直译的现场才会。
那么在中国，英语有多重要呢？
在一线城市很重要，但是在2、3线城市的话，就略显得比较次要一点。
在中国，主要看工作吧，主要是看工作。如果说你工作上，与外国人打交道的比较多，那肯定是英语还是比较重要的。如果说你是在一个国企，或者说，怎么说呢，私企这样的，就是跟外国人打交道比较少，那其实我觉得无所谓，只要说你会就可以了。
因为我觉得你不管哪个行业，因为现在有很多新的技术，然后新的资讯，一手的最好的东西，最前沿的东西，还是产生于就它还是原创于那些讲英语的环境。所以如果你英文没有障碍的话，你可以很快第一时间学习到最先进的技术，对吧？所以很多行业都是这样的。
走出国门啊，我出去旅游啊，
That tends to be the main
然后
one
我
just
就
for
觉得很
travel.
多国家是那个，因为英语是个全球通用的语言。然后我是一个从事呢是旅游行当的，然后我个性呢就喜欢就是走出去到处看看。然后我觉得英语不好呢，会影响我整个行程。我去那个酒店 check in 啊什么啊，然后购物啊什么，我吃饭啊什么，会影响我。所以我还有学了英文呢，对我的工作还是有很大的帮助。
为什么
So that's travel is a major reason for this. If I am working with a student, an older student, maybe someone over 50, they're probably not learning it for a job, and they're almost certainly not planning to relocate, although that happens. Anyone that age, they're probably trying to learn the language because they plan to travel a lot after they retire. Very common, very standard response. Frankly, even with younger students, even some of my college students are like that, the ones who aren't planning on studying overseas. Continuing.
中国人学英语这么重要呢？
因为美国是第一大经济体啊，等中国是第一大经济体的时候，美国一定会学中文的。
每个国家学习英文都挺重要的，就像学习中文一样重要，就是为了跟别人有一个良好的沟通，然后走向世界嘛。
大部分中国人来说，现在我觉得学习英文越来越不重要。其实，对，好像没有我们小时候那么的重要。其实现在，比如说我们去到近一点的亚洲国家去旅游或者干嘛的，你会发现会中文的人越来越多。
就是在你的观念中，在中国的教育体系中，那个英文教育体系是最大的问题是什么？
他们就等于没有实用性，没有实战性。然后这就是这种考试的话啊，纸面的考试的话都是很好，单词量也很大，但是它不能用到生活中。
就是为了考试而考试，这是最大的一个问题。
我觉得最大的一个问题就是我们之前呢，可能更专项的是一种就是死记硬背的一个东西。
That's everything in China.
它最大的一个缺陷就是环境。所以我觉得就是，就像很多现在就是这些就是提供自学的这种机构一样，它可以更注重的是一个交流的环境。
我在念大学的时候，我觉得就是反正我就觉得还是有点死板的。我们的英语系的老师，他每天我就觉得上英语课的时候，只是领着我们一句他读一句，我读一句，就我们可能有70%的时间就在做这个。
Yeah, it's just
他读一下，我们读一下，他读一下，就我觉得很死板。
It's all drills. It's all drills when you see their classes. I've actually sat in on some of the English classes that are done either in universities or even in public schools sometimes. And the ones they do with the local teachers really are just drill and kill. Which, granted, when you're starting off, that is important when you don't know anything. But eventually, just drill and drill and drill and drill, it ceases to serve a function. Just repeating the same words once you know those words doesn't do anything. And that, by the way, is how you can get into a situation where you spend 8 years studying a language and you still can't speak it. You know the words, you know the pronunciation, you may even know the grammar, but you can't put those pieces together because you've never had to. And that is, I've kind of been a little harsh on the foreigners teaching English overseas, even though I do it, because I know 90% of the time it's worthless. But if we're being totally honest, that is kind of the function that we serve over there, is giving these students a chance to get practical education, which they never get in their classes because that's not how the Chinese education is set up for any subject at all. Continuing.
已经没有上学很多年，所以我也不知道现在目前英文教育是怎么样。但我有一个侄子，他现在在上小学，然后我也看过他的小学英语课本，然后比我们那个时候已经难很多了，而且我发现他们的口语也不错，就是还是真的会。
The textbooks. Okay. I hate the textbooks we have to use for these classes. They're always too hard. I don't know what the local teachers are doing with these things. But what I do with them is I try to figure out if my students are going to understand any of this, which most of the time they don't. And then after that, I have to put in a cursory effort to make what I do match the material. but it is by and large my class and my exercises. Right now, I'm doing a series of speaking exercises. It's already hamstrung by the fact that I'm still having to do this remote, which I hate. But the bigger problem I have is the material is so theoretical. It's supposed to be like an intercultural communications thing. And it's entirely in English, which I think most of my students cannot handle what's in that book. I mean, some of these things, one of them, they were doing a thing about identities, and they started talking about like Maslow's hierarchy. Like, this stuff is way over their heads. And granted, this is college level, but I've even done like some of the classes I used to do with like 11-year-olds. They'd have them reading like science fiction stories. They'd have articles on things like automation. It was so weird. And the material was just so far over their heads that I had to adjust it so they'd get anything out of the class at all. Continuing.
实际有一些应用能力，比我们小时候在学校学的东西比较 practical。
你觉得如何能改善？
从幼儿园或者是从小学开始就配那个外教，然后使用那种进入式的教育，学习、吃饭、玩的这种就是都在一起的话，
多说多听。去说这些英语的话，别怕，你开口没关系的，错了没人会说你的呀。
Nope.
我觉得学英语其实是一个可以很好玩的一个事情，对小朋友来说也是。现在国际化那么发达，然后他们也看很多国外的一些电影啊，然后接受很多外国的文化，所以其实学英语可以是比较有意思、好玩的一件事情。
啊，这是一个很艰难的问题。中国也可以到，就是多有一些项目到国外去，就是呢，可能说国家多支持一点。我觉得去国外对口语还是比较重要的。
How important is English in your country? Are people perceived differently if they're good at English? Let us know in the comments below. For more authentic insight into the latest news and cultural trends from all over Asia, be sure to subscribe to Asian Boss and follow us on our social media. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay curious.
Okay, so yeah, that I think everything they said was what I would say. It's, I think, very important. A lot of, honestly though, even in just the 15 years I've been doing this, things have changed. I think back in the day, it was kind of a badge of honor if your child could speak English. I'm not sure that's necessarily is true, although it's still perceived as an important career skill. Especially for students studying overseas. As I mentioned in a previous episode, that's why they come here, or go to the UK or any other countries to study. All right, well, that is the end for today. If you have anything to say, any comments, I love to have those. Of course, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe, and I will see you again on another day.